Hello. Good
Hi.
morning, everyone. It is not 1 a.m. It is 9:40, but I feel like it's 1 a.m. So
Very much so.
Great. Kayla is operations director at Paperleaf, which is a fancy way of saying that she oversees product teams. As a former product manager, she loves a good process and specializes in making processes better for Paperleaf's employees, clients, and the end users of the products they make, and is the design director at Paperleaf as well, and has a wealth of design strategy and visual communication experiences and expertise. She's an alumni of the University of Alberta's Bachelor of Design program, and since then has been passionate about fostering collaborative spaces to create digital experiences for the communities. She's an advocate of user-centered and accessible design, which is a passion for me. Anne and Kayla is joining us today from Edmonton, Alberta. So let's welcome in the chat, Kayla and Anne.
awesome. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, so we're going to go a little bit back to basics today. We're going to talk about user testing when you're broke AF, as Ed and I like to call it. So my name's Kayla Baretta. As Andrew mentioned, I'm the operations director at Paperleaf.
Hi, I'm Anne Brown. I'm the design director at Paperleaf.
Yeah, so we've wanted to talk about this topic for a while because it's something that we face almost every day. So we work with clients, so with organizations, to strategize, build, maintain, and optimize their products. So we're constantly selling the value of what we're doing, the value of why even talk to users, and always a big part of that conversation is budget. Everyone always wants to spend money on features, but no one really wants to spend money on figuring out what the right features are, or even sometimes optimizing their product after it launches.
Yeah, and that's definitely where the struggle comes in. Often our clients, or even potentially if you have like internal stakeholders, you get this budget to deliver something really sexy, like a new website or a platform that will change your business or your mobile app, like the list goes on. But you never get budget to talk to users and actually figure out if what you're building or potentially have built even makes sense. So we've had to get really thrifty, and that's kind of where this talk comes in. So what is user testing? Let's make sure we're all on the same page with like the basics. So it's the process of getting feedback from real people to determine needs or gain insights into what's working and what isn't working on a product.
And a lot of you are probably thinking, or maybe you have in the past, but don't I already know what my users want? And the short answer to that is no, you don't. So you're not the user. So if you work in technology, perhaps you're a designer, a developer, a product manager, you're already more competent than the majority of your users at technology, unless your user group is one of those specific groups, in which case you're still not the user. So you know more about your product and care more about it than your user ever will. Often when we're working in a product, we become so invested in it, or we have previous experience and we rely on instinct to make product decisions instead of confirming our assumptions. And assumptions sometimes can be good, and we might have a really good idea, but the real question here is it good enough that someone will actually use it? Will someone actually pay money to use your product?
Yeah, so how do you start? So the first thing is, like straight talk for a second, you're going to test with users anyway. Like if you test before or during the build of your product, you have time and money to course correct. If you decide to launch your product without testing, then you're going to test with everybody on a live product and realize that you might have just wasted a lot of time and money. So how do you start? Do you have money and budget? That's awesome if you do. You're a step ahead of a lot of people. There are a lot of cool tools available to you and some really sweet companies, even like us, that can help you with that. If you don't though, that's okay. We have you covered. You'll have to invest some time instead of money to get things done.
So let's start with, do you have people you need to convince? The benefits of testing aren't always obvious for everyone. Some people don't know the value because they haven't seen the value before. How do you convince stakeholders or clients that this is even a good use of their time or budget? And some of you might hate this, but I'm going to say, don't ask for permission to do the right thing, to do your job correctly. So if it's a client, you actually have a leg up. They don't know how you work. They haven't been through your process before. So you can tell them it's part of your process. You can introduce the idea to them early and often. You can fake it till you make it, really. But if you work with internal stakeholders, you might need to sell it a bit more. And we recommend like focus on the value of not doing user testing. So the business case is that you'll waste a lot of money and time building something that might not be right or solve the right problems when you can quickly work to validate some of your ideas up front. You can give people a small but realistic time frame and budget to work with. You could say something like, I'll take 10 hours over the next 2 weeks to do this work, so that the investment is small, it's tangible, it's something that you can get buy-in on like easily without spending hours and hours and lots of time doing it. And we always recommend bringing them along for the ride. There isn't a client or stakeholder that we've invited to sit in on user testing that didn't immediately start to see the value of doing that exercise more in the future. Here's some helpful phrases that we use when selling user testing. Things like, as part of our process, or we will want to test function with some of your users. Could you help us recruit some people to be involved? Or that seems tricky, confusing. Sometimes it's like, interesting. Let's test it with a few users and see how they find the experience.
Yeah, so how do you actually find users? Sometimes this can just be the biggest struggle. The high roller solution is that you can pay for users using a service. There's lots of them. But that's probably not going to be like the first route you're going to take, especially when you're starting out. It's definitely not the one we took, or even do very much today. There's a pretty good chance, though, that your organization and client already interfaces with users quite a bit. If you're working for a product, for a client, ask them to help you recruit members or customers. More often than not, they are already connecting with them on like newsletters or social media. So utilize those platforms. If you're working with an in-house team, just ask yourself who works with those users today and knows them best. So this could be your support team, a help desk, or a sales team. Whoever those people are, utilize them to help you either find users or they can be the users. And then the last resort, and the one we use to this day and have used more than once this year, is to cash your chips in with friends and family. Your circle is a lot bigger than you think. We often kind of forget that people in our life have jobs and experiences outside of like being our mom or our aunt or a friend. So you're like, if you're working on a project, say for Alberta teachers, hey, like that guy's wife is a teacher, get her in. Need to test a new feature for like a fitness app, like that guy is kind of fit, like let's get him in there. Utilize them is kind of what I'm saying. At the end of the day, though, if you don't have the perfect user, what do? You do it anyway. Like ideally, you want to test with people who fit your product's user personas, yes. But like valuable insights can be found by just like actually getting people outside of the product circle to test and give feedback on the product.
We're not even joking, like we have used my mom several times as a user tester. She's fit a lot of
experience.
Yeah, she's fit a lot of the groups that we've been working with lately. So we're going to talk about a couple low budget choices. Like we mentioned before, all of these choices involve you investing your time rather than your dollars to kind of get some results. So we're going to walk through 4 methods that can quickly and easily engage users. There are a lot more methods, tools, and ways you can test with users. These are just 4 that we use really often, and they're 4 that are going to be done on the cheaper side. You can use like sticky notes if you're in person, or a lot of free tools that exist online if you're not. So the first one we have here is user interviews. So user interviews can be simply talking to people who will be affected by the product about what they need, or even how they use comparable products today. So the feedback needs to be relevant. So we recommend coming up before with a list of questions to ask that really like resolve around your objectives or product goals. And when it comes to the right questions to ask, consider including some variety of open-ended questions and some closed questions that target kind of different objectives or goals that you're looking to do. We like to ask questions that get to know the user. So we might say, like, describe your typical day at their role or environment if we're looking for stuff about their job. Um, we gather like specific behavior. So, what kind of devices do you use when visiting like this website or application? Or sometimes we're even looking like how technically savvy might this user be? So, do they spend 10 hours on the internet a day or only one? And then sometimes we'll clarify their goals. So, like when you're coming to this application, what is the main thing you're trying to do? What are you trying to do most often? And you can give them some get their opinions. If you have a current application, like what do you like about this currently? Or even if you don't, what do you like about the current process you take to do this activity? And then kind of getting them to evaluate or rate their experience. So right now, like, what do you think about this? Or if you were going to give this a score between 1 and 5, why would you, what score might you give that? You can also use interviews as walkthroughs by getting users to demonstrate their current process. They have either in person or via screen share. So this can be really valuable to experience their current workflows and identify any pain points they might have, some that they won't even know they have. So a big one is like a lot of people use Excel spreadsheets to do business processes and keep track of business processes, and your tool or product might be replacing that. So you'd want to see like, how do you do this today? We use interviews in the early stages of a project. So usually when we're discovering and gathering insights about like what a product might be. And we try to make these happen before decisions have been made or work has been done. We typically recommend about 3 to 5 users. Any less than 3, and you're not going to get enough data. Around more than 5, and we start to see some redundancy. But if you have more, that's okay too. For the user, this is usually 30 minutes to 1 hour. It kind of depends on the number of questions you're asking. Prep is usually 2 hours. And in general, like your process is to find your users and book meetings, set goals and decide your questions. Facilitate those interviews, and then have a debrief. The tools that you need for this are when it's safe to be in person, you can just meet someone really anywhere, or you can use a video conferencing platform like Google Meet or Zoom or something like that. Another method is to do surveys. So qualitative surveys can be an easy tool for gathering rich feedback, but they need to be quick and painless for users. So every question that you kind of add to a survey increases the likelihood of drop off. So don't bloat your surveys with too many questions. But after determining your goal, you can come up with around like 5 to 8 what and how questions. So some tips for working on surveys are things like don't ask for anything that analytics can already tell you. Open-ended questions will often gain more effective insights, but they'll also take more time to go through later. So you need to balance like how many of those you want to go through. Front load the most important questions just in case someone decides not to finish your survey. We usually recommend fitting your questions onto one screen. And then if you have a huge list of questions, maybe split that up into multiple surveys or decide which are your most important and ask those first. So this one, we would recommend at least 10 to 15 users, always more if you can. The time for this is about 15 to 20 minutes per user. It'll still probably take you about 2 hours to prep. So in this case, you want to kind of like set the goals and decide your questions, find a user group to distribute to and distribute them, and then kind of take that data, debrief it. There are lots of tools out there that do surveys. SurveyMonkey and Google Forms both have free versions that you can use. They also have paid versions, but the free versions are also very sufficient. One of the really interesting things that I also saw happen recently with, I think it was Yellow Pencil has been doing surveys with the city where they're actually sending a functional exercise for someone to do, and then they're asking them questions about that exercise. So surveys can also don't have to always inform you in research. They can also inform you about a prototype or product that you have made. So that's been really cool and interesting thing to see.
Yeah, so the next one, the third one we have is card sorting. So this is an exercise, especially if you're in the midst of an information architecture, you can do to, like, it's an exercise you can do with people to find out how they think content should be organized and categorized. So it can take a lot of the guesswork out of kind of creating a sitemap. So how many people do you do this with? Usually like 3 to 5 groups. And how does it work? So you choose a set of topics. It's around 30 to 50 topics, no more than 50, or they become very hard to sort. And they're items that represent either core product ideas or pieces of a workflow. So make sure that they're all on the same hierarchical level. So maybe you want to sort, for example, shoe types. So your cards would be runners, heels, boots, but you wouldn't have a card that's like shoes. So either in person or with sticky notes. We've used way too many sticky notes in our time in the non-COVID days. I miss the the in-person card sorting a lot. Or you can do this remotely with a screen share or like a free tool like Whimsical or Jamboard, anything that has like those movable sticky note things. You can get a small group, like usually 3 or 5 people, no more, or they kind of talk over each other, or a single user to group and label ideas. You kind of like sit back and watch how they move things around and observe and see how they make categories for these topics. At the end, you can ask questions. This is the great thing about doing it in person or moderated. You can ask questions to confirm your assumptions. So like, hey, why did you put those 2 cards in that category? What made you choose this label? What about this label? What about the wording of this label kind of makes sense to you or resonates with you? So like I said, it's like about 3 to 5 like groups or different sorts you want to happen, just so you get enough insight. It's max 1 hour per user. And the prep time, you really just have to make the cards. If you have like a complex system, sometimes making the cards can definitely take some time, but the prep time really isn't too much. And then you can use any video conferencing platform, and then we use Whimsical or Jamboard dependent on. You can do the same kind of exercise like sticky noting. You can use that kind of method with tree testing as well. So you can actually test an information architecture you've created to see if users are finding what they're looking for. And again, you can use this with sticky notes and screen share as well. There are also options to do this like card sorting and tree testing to gain quantitative data and gather insights from a lot higher of a number of users. And you can use platforms like Optimal Workshop. That's what we use. Again, there would be a cost to that, and you'll need a higher number of users, so around like 20 to 30 to get that data. And again, I love interacting with the user, so you definitely miss that. So it's not my favorite. Yeah, so that's card sorting. And then my favorite way to get feedback is moderated testing. So usability tests are this great way to get feedback from user about a workflow, but they're a bit more effort to facilitate. They involve getting like 3 to 5 users. Like Kayla said, any less than 3, you're not going to get the insights you want, and then any more, you kind of see a lot of redundancy. You want to get them in front of a wireframe or prototype or even a live product to get feedback on whether your assumptions that you made are correct. So whether you choose to do that in person or remotely, the goal is to get as much feedback as you can. So what is the prep work for that? It's a lot more prep work. So you have to book the meeting and obviously send the user anything they need upfront ahead of time. You create a script. You make things consistent for each user. You try to. It is like qualitative data, but you still want to create as similar of experience as you can. Then you decide what tasks you want them to do and create scenarios for them. So the task could be, if we're talking about shoes again, purchase a product. So you want them to purchase a product, but that's not the task you're going to give them. You're going to create a scenario for that to give them the context they need. So you're looking for a pair of runners is the scenario. You have a budget of $50 and please go purchase the shoes. So that's what you give the user. And then by creating that, again, you give them the context without giving them the answer. So that's kind of the prep work. Then what happens in the meeting? How are you going to facilitate it? So you meet the user, you don't jump right into scenarios. You meet them, you give them the context they need, and you make them feel comfortable. ask them some pre-testing questions, not just to get them cozy, but also to get any information you need to kind of grade on a curve. So what's your role? Have you seen this product before? That's really helpful. If they've been clicking through it like 15 minutes before, you're going to get different information than you did if they have never seen it before. And then how often do you say shop online if you're doing like a e-commerce site or something, testing an e-commerce site? So you get all the information. That's probably about like 10 to 15 minutes of just getting the user comfortable. And then you're going to start the scenarios. So read the first scenario out loud, have them perform the tasks, then do the same for the second, so on. You have about an hour to work with usually. So that's probably 5 to 6 scenarios, depending on how complex your product is. And then you end the session by getting them to summarize their experience. Thank them, show appreciation, do what your mom taught you, and let them know that what they gave you is really valuable. And then we also always ask if they'd be willing to test again. There hasn't been one person that hasn't said yes to that. And then we add it to our pool of future testers, which was really awesome. So again, to summarize, 3 to 5 testers, 1 hour per user, prep time's like 3 hours, depending on how complex it is. And then any video conferencing platform. There are a lot of paid options for unmoderated testing. Personally, again, as someone who likes to interact with the users, I'm all about the moderated testing, but there are these paid options if your time is really valuable. And then some services like Lookback that can make mobile testing a lot easier. So some facilitation best practices, some things I've learned as we've been doing this more and more. It doesn't have to be perfect to test. As a designer, I often think that you're going to ship this thing and you want it to be beautiful before it hits anybody's eyes, but it's actually often better if it isn't. Users feel like they can give critical feedback on something that's not pixel perfect. So it doesn't have to be perfect. The second one is to like guide them by asking them to verbalize their thoughts. Like, hey, I saw you clicked here. What were you thinking? But don't lead them. Rather than like, did you find that difficult? Just say like, how did you find that? And you're going to get more honest responses. Because if you ask, like, was it difficult? They're going to say it was difficult. This one is extremely difficult for me, but leave space for them to struggle. Silence is all right. I often want to jump in the minute there's a struggle, but a lot can be learned by waiting to see like where they go next, or even what their third or fourth option is. Then always have a note taker. I learned this the hard way. You're trying to be busy guiding the tester between scenarios and making them comfortable, and having someone to watch for nonverbal cues can give richer feedback. And then my last point is incentives are really nice, and they're more and more becoming best practice, but we found that they're not always necessary. People just really like to give their opinion. And also if I'm testing with Kayla's mom, like she's not going to get money for being there. She's going to get some homemade cookies, and that's okay.
Awesome. So moving kind of into what do I test? So we talked about a couple methods. This isn't a comprehensive list by any means, but here are some examples of what methods you might use to test some different aspects of your product and in different stages that product might be in. So for example, if you have an existing product, it's great to run a moderated user testing session on that existing product. Are there customers or internal staff who have processes that you maybe need to understand, and you're kind of starting out that project to digitize those processes? That I would hold interviews and kind of get them to walk me through those processes today. If I'm trying to organize a IA, I might do a card sort test. Or if I already have an IA, but I want to test it and see if it works, I might do a tree test. If I have a prototype built, or even like some sketches on something, I might run a moderated user testing. And if I need to find out like what features are missing, I might send out a survey. So you want to test as early and as often as possible, but it's not always going to be realistic to test at every stage of a product. So sometimes it's helpful to decide what you might be testing early in the project so you can save time and budget for it later. So if you don't test your project until it's close to like when the development is complete, you might have no budget to make those changes after testing. So for example, we just recently completed a project where we did tree testing really early in a like research phase of the project to kind of see like how people might move through the information architecture. And then the main problem or concern was that the navigation might still be a bit confusing. So we built out the navigation first. It wasn't even really like styled or anything, and then did moderated usability testing to see how people might move through that navigation and if it was working. So some questions to ask yourself about deciding what to test and when is kind of like, what is the goal of doing testing and what do we need to know? What's the most important task that users need to do or complete? Would testing here help solve a key problem in our workflow? And how much time and budget do we have to test? Okay, so let's recap. We went through quite a few things in the short time that we've had, but here's kind of the five main points. So you're not the user. Don't ask for permission to test. You can always find users in unexpected places. Interviews, surveys, card sorting, and moderated sessions can all be done with no budget, but they will take your time, and test early and as often as you can. This is a quote that kind of like inspired this talk. So it says, quit telling us how great you are and start telling us how you plan to deliver something that helps the user become greater. And then there are 3 resources here that have really helped us with our processes and kind of helped us get started in user testing. The number one is a book that I'm sure many of you have read, which is Rocket Surgery Made Easy. And here are some other useful resources as well. Any questions?
Yes, we've got a couple here. First one we have is from Joel, and he asks, is 3 to 5 users going to bring you enough insight to develop good personas or gather enough wide-ranging data?
Yeah, so qualitative data is different than gaining that quantitative data. So qualitative data, we're getting opinions, we're getting kind of that personal feedback, and it can be really useful and gain tons of insights. And yeah, 3 to 5 is normally the right amount of users. As soon as you get beyond 5, you're starting to see the same kind of results. We just did a project where we tested both English and French users, and there were definitely some like navigational language differences, but overarchingly, even then, we did like, I think 9 testers, and we really started to see a lot of the same patterns and a lot of the same issues and results that we got. Yeah.
The only exception to this, I would say, is like if you have really significantly different user groups.
Yeah, exactly.
Then I would say like it's 3 to 5 per user group.
Type.
So
Yeah.
for example, like one of our clients works directly with employers, and then they'll work with like the reports of that employer, so that their workers, and like we always try to test with both user groups because they're having very different experiences in their day-to-day and in the product itself. So
yeah,
Right.
definitely.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. We've got perhaps time for another one. Let's see here. Hello, this is from Jonathan. Hello, I'm really interested in how you aggregate qualitative data. Do you have any tips for extracting insights in a concise manner?
Yeah, so we take pretty actionable notes, and then every time we test, we do like a big recommendations document where we're really highlighting like the key struggles or key pain points or even key observations, and then we're making that known, and then some sort of options for recommendations for making those changes. So we make sure that we categorize that data and that feedback, and make sure that it's accessible. Especially, we work with a lot of clients, so they want to see, hey, if they couldn't join the session, what were the pain points, and then how do you plan on resolving those? Does that answer your question?
I hope so. Let's see. Maybe we'll squeeze in one more. this is from Lisa, to
Sure.
choose users, how do you find the right or typical users or a good variety of users? How do you know if they will be objective and act like a typical user or not feel the pressure or not or something since they know they are being evaluated or watched? I have sometimes wondered when I fill out surveys if the results are skewed by who is willing. That's a great question.
Yeah, so Kayla, you probably have insights to add to this too, but so there's kind of two questions there. One is like, how do you get users comfortable? So you really have to make sure that like they know that they're not the ones being tested. And so that's kind of part of that script we talked a little bit about when you're doing some of that like facilitated sessions is you really start by getting them to talk, getting them to ask questions, and also just really reassuring them that, hey, like we want your feedback. Sometimes I don't even let them know that like I'm the one who designed it or our team's the one who designed it. You really just like you make them feel comfortable. Also, it helps to have like a smiley, sunny disposition, and you can kind of make them feel comfortable. So there's that, and then also finding users. You don't, I guess, we utilize our clients to really know like where they can find the right users. A lot of the times you get the ones that are really eager or invested or know a lot, and sometimes you get ones that don't give the right feedback too, and that's okay. Like we said before, like any feedback is going to be better than no feedback. So even if they know the product really well, we've had clients that have like, we want to just use our staff. And it's like, no, don't use your staff because like they know the product so well. But even then we do get feedback, like good feedback from them. So
I would say like the right or typical user is the user that uses your product,
Yeah.
or that you want to use your product, because there is not going to be like any right answer. How I interact with a product is probably different than how Anne does because of the experiences, and like you should see the things I make in Whimsical. They do not look good. And that's okay, because we have different experiences and we come from different places. I think a big thing too is like a lot of people feel like testing has to be really formal, and it makes the user feel like it's formal and awkward.
Yeah.
So like Anne's actually great at facilitating sessions because Anne is never formal. I'll be honest.
Never.
She's always very like relaxed and chill. And like we use a lot of like informal language, and usually that helps make people feel really comfortable. If you do bring other people into the testing session though, for example, like usually Anne will facilitate a session, she might bring in someone else to take notes, and then sometimes a client might come. It is essential that you introduce those people and like that they're just here and what their roles are, or else the person like 100% feels like they're being watched and feels really awkward about the other people being there. So just like treat them like they're a human. I do think sometimes like results are definitely sometimes skewed by who is willing, but that's going to be like a nature of what we do. We can't really control. You want people to be involved as much as possible, but you can't make everyone be involved. If you do have budget for incentives, that's where that can really help, because people love to get free shoes or Amazon gift cards or whatever that might be. We're using shoes because we're working on a shoe website right now. So that is like those are always like possibilities. Even like we've had clients that will just like give someone a month of free use of their product, and that sometimes can be enough to get different people than you might not get. So
Well, thank you so much, Anne and Kayla. It was really a pleasure to have you join us today.